Welcome to Lesson 6, Incorporating Feedback. So far in this course, you've selected a project to work with. Next, you generated ideas for that project and explored possibilities. Then you created prototypes to test your ideas and to see how they operated in reality. You then presented your prototypes to other people and got feedback. Now it's time to take what you've learned from your feedback and incorporate it into your project. So there are two types of feedback I want to talk about. First is the feedback you get from the work itself as you are creating your prototypes. As you create prototypes, your work begins to take shape and you get to experience the work in reality, even though it's in a nascent form. Prototypes allow you to see how your project will operate in the real world, which is often quite different from how we think it will operate when it's in the ideation phase. Now, for many projects, these prototypes will allow you to see your ideas put into practice for the very first time. So as you're creating your prototypes, you will be reacting to your work. You'll be able to see what it looks like, what it feels like, what it makes you think about. You'll also get a sense of how your materials are working. It's very common for an idea to seem like it will work when it's in a sketchbook or in a drawing, but when you actually build it, it doesn't work as well as you thought. This is particularly common with materials like wood, fabric, or clay, any materials that require a good deal of skill. So the other kind of feedback is feedback that you get from other people. So at this point, hopefully you've presented your prototypes to at least one other person, and hopefully 2, 3, or more people. Now, incorporating feedback from other people can be incredibly challenging. It's possible that you've gotten different feedback from different people. It's also possible that you've gotten feedback that you don't agree with. So sorting through the feedback you get from others and deciding what and how to incorporate it into your project is the focus of this lesson. One of the most powerful strategies I've discovered for incorporating feedback is to reflect and write about the feedback you've received. Now, it's important for you to understand that the writing you'll be doing is for your eyes only. Don't worry about whether the writing is good or not. This writing is simply an opportunity for you to sort through your thoughts, to organize them, and to figure out which feedback you want to incorporate into your project. So to start this process, I recommend asking yourself questions and then reflecting and writing your answers. Here's a list of questions you should consider regarding feedback from the work itself, the feedback that the work transmits directly to you as you are creating your prototypes. What did you learn when creating these prototypes? What aspects of the prototypes worked as expected? What aspects of the prototypes worked better than expected? What aspects of the prototypes did not work out as expected? What was your initial reaction to the finished prototypes? What did you learn about your materials? What did your finished prototypes make you think? And what did your finished prototypes make you feel? Now, of course, this is not a complete list of questions, but this list should get you started. It's a way to reflect on your experience creating the prototypes and to gauge your reaction to the finished prototypes. Remember, this is your project. You want to make your vision for your project. So hopefully, upon seeing your prototypes, you'll learn a number of things and you'll figure out if the project is going the direction you want. This is incredibly valuable information. Next, here are some questions to consider regarding feedback from others. What feedback do you agree with? What feedback do you disagree with? What aspects of your prototypes elicited the response you intended? What aspects of your project elicited a different response than intended? What gaps or insufficiencies of your project were revealed? If you got feedback from multiple people, how was it similar? How is it different? What will you explore further? What changes will you make to your project moving forward? What will you add to the work? What will you subtract from the work? And finally, how will the feedback you received change your project moving forward? Now remember, this is your project. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide what feedback you want to incorporate, if any. But these questions will help you start to consider what kind of feedback you've received both from the work and from other people. By reflecting upon and writing about these questions, you'll be able to make distinctions about the feedback you received and figure out how you want to incorporate it into your project. It's all too common for creative people to destroy a unique project by attempting to make it fit into other people's preconceived notions. And when getting feedback from other creative professionals and practitioners, it's very easy to be taken off track, and to incorporate ideas that you don't necessarily agree with but you feel pressured to. Ultimately, this is where experience comes in. You need to go through this process of prototyping and getting feedback many times before you get good at sorting through feedback and figure out how to successfully incorporate it into your project while still maintaining your original vision. You don't want to get stuck making somebody else's vision for your project. But you also don't want to disregard feedback that's not flattering. Don't assume that you always know better. Ultimately, knowing which feedback to incorporate and which feedback to disregard requires experience. And this is what I'm hoping you'll get from this lesson. So before we move on, I want to call your attention to a very important idea: overlapping feedback. Often, when getting feedback from multiple people, you will receive similar feedback from more than one person. Pay close attention when this happens. When multiple people identify the same issue in your work, this is a very strong signal that it should be addressed. So once you've considered all of the feedback you've received and decided what feedback you want to incorporate into your work, you have a decision to make. Should the next iteration of your project be another round of prototypes, or should you move on to the final product? I call this decision iterate or commit. To iterate is the act of repeating something with small changes, with the hope of getting closer to your desired outcome. Do you use prototypes to go through another iteration of your project, or do you commit to working on the final version of your project? So here are a few considerations. At this stage of the creative process, I usually go into what I call a feedback loop. I tend to go through 3 rounds of prototyping and getting feedback before I move on to finished work. Now, of course, there's no correct number of times you should iterate with prototypes. But I try and find a balance between getting as much feedback as I can, but not so much feedback that the project is taken off track or stalls. At some point, we just need to get on with the work. So when do you know when you're ready to commit to the final version of your project? This is a tough question to answer, but at some point, you'll have enough experience with your prototypes that you feel comfortable with the material you're working with, you're excited with the results you're getting from your prototypes, and the feedback you're getting is mostly positive. So ideally, that's the place you'll get to before beginning the final version of your project. But of course, sometimes you have a schedule to stick to and you just need to get on with the work. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. That kind of pressure can often inspire people to create good work. If you have a deadline to hit and you're not feeling confident about your work, that's okay. Make the best work you can with the current experience and feedback you have. And remember, there's always another project, and everything you've learned from creating this project can be incorporated into your next project. Your task is to incorporate feedback into your project. If your time and schedule permit, I recommend taking your project through at least one more round of prototyping and feedback. But if you need to move on to the final project, that's okay too. Just remember to incorporate everything you've learned so far into the final version of your project. So to know which feedback to incorporate and which feedback to disregard, first, reflect and write about your experiences making the prototypes. Focus on the following questions. What did you learn when creating these prototypes? What aspects of the prototypes worked as expected? What aspects of the prototypes worked better than expected? What aspects of the prototypes did not work out as expected? What was your initial reaction to the finished prototypes? What did you learn about your materials? What did your finished prototypes make you think? And what did your finished prototypes make you feel? Next, reflect and write about your experiences getting feedback from other people. Focus on the following questions. What feedback do you agree with? What feedback do you disagree with? What aspects of your prototypes elicited the response you intended? What aspects of your project elicited a different response than intended? What gaps or insufficiencies of your project were revealed? If you got feedback from multiple people, how was it similar? How is it different? What will you explore further? What changes will you make to your project moving forward? What will you add to the work? What will you subtract from the work? And finally, how will the feedback you received change your project moving forward? Now, of course, you don't need to write an answer to each and every question. This is just a list to get you started. And you may identify specific questions that you need to answer for your project that aren't on this list. So this is not an exhaustive list of questions. It's just a starting point. Feel free to add or subtract any questions that make sense for your project. So if it helps, feel free to play this video as you reflect and write, pausing the video after each question and taking time to write out your answer. Once you're done writing, hit play so you can hear the next question. Then pause, write, and repeat. By doing this, you'll figure out what feedback you want to incorporate into the next iteration of your project, whether it be more prototypes or the final version. As always, I hope to see you in the video journal for this lesson, where you're going to see me go through the process of evaluating the feedback that I've received and figuring out what feedback I want to incorporate into my project. So I hope you can join me for that video journal. After that, I will see you in Lesson 7 when we're going to develop a plan that will take us through the rest of the creative process for our project.